Boring history for sleep. Life in a Bronze Age. Hillfort hour by hour. Hey guys, tonight we're climbing back thousands of years into the windswept hills of the Bronze Age to step into the rhythms of daily life inside a hillfort. Picture the mist still clinging to the rugged slopes, dew glittering on the grass like tiny stars, and the distant bleating of sheep echoing from the valley below. The massive timber and earth walls of the fort rise up before you. Ancient yet somehow familiar a community, braced against the wildness of the world beyond. It's early morning, the air crisp enough to sting your lungs, and you're definitely not ready for the hard labor ahead. You probably wouldn't survive this. You're used to mornings where coffee is the hardest thing you have to lift. Here, life starts with no snooze button, no 5 more minutes, and absolutely no oat milk lattes. You'll be lucky if you get a mouthful of grain mash before the day's work begins. And yes, there's a good chance you'll step in something unpleasant. Before sunrise, usually left behind by goats. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, drop a comment with your location and the local time. It's always fascinating to know where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first hints of dawn turn the eastern sky pale silver as you wake on a straw-stuffed mat inside a smoky roundhouse. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim interior lit only by embers glowing faintly in the central hearth. The thatched roof rises steeply overhead, its beams blackened from years of firelight. Around you, other sleepers begin to stir. Farmers, hunters, children, all wrapped in coarse wool blankets. The chill seeps through the walls, making you pull your own rough cloak tighter. Someone nearby coughs softly and reaches for a stick to prod the embers back into life. Sparks leap upward as the fire catches, filling the house with warm, flickering light and a little too much smoke. You notice the tang of last night's supper lingering in the air, roasted barley, and maybe some onion, and the faint but ever-present smell of the animals kept close by. This is no sterile suburban home. The boundaries between people, livestock, and earth are thin here. You step outside into the cold, damp grass, the breath of morning mist on your face. The hillfort feels alive even at this hour. Chickens rustle in their makeshift coops, goats bleat impatiently from their pens, and a pair of dogs lope by tails wagging. Beyond the walls, the world is still mostly wild forest and open moorland. Inside, the community bustles with a quiet purpose. At the fort's entrance, you see 2 figures already on watch, spears in hand. They nod as you pass, their faces solemn beneath the shadow of their helmets. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age hillforts were primarily defensive strongholds or simply well-fortified villages, but standing here in the pre-dawn gloom, you understand why fortifications mattered. Out there beyond the walls could be traders, neighbors, or raiders. You take a moment to absorb the layout. The fort's thick ramparts encircle a cluster of roundhouses, animal enclosures, and small work areas. Narrow pathways snake between the structures, lined with piles of firewood and storage pits dug into the earth. Everything here serves a purpose. You notice a series of trenches leading rainwater downhill, cleverly keeping the main living spaces from turning into mud pits. In the distance, you hear the rhythmic thump of someone grinding grain. The sound carries across the compound like a heartbeat, reminding you that breakfast must be coming soon. But before you head toward the warmth of food and fire, you pause on a small rise to take in the view. The mist is lifting now, revealing the valley far below. Rivers gleam like silver ribbons, and the forests beyond look almost endless. You realize how much this hillfort means to the people inside it. It's not just a home, it's safety, community, and survival all rolled into one. You pull your cloak tighter against the morning chill and start making your way toward the smell of cooking fires, ready to see how this Bronze Age day will unfold. You follow the smell of smoke and warm grain through the winding paths of the hillfort until you find yourself outside a roundhouse with a hearth blazing bright. A woman kneels beside the fire, stirring a blackened pot with a wooden paddle. The porridge bubbling inside is thick, made from barley or wheat ground only hours ago. A faint drizzle of honey glistens on top as she ladles portions into small clay bowls, her face flushed from the fire's heat. You're handed a bowl of the clay warm against your fingers, and you sit cross-legged on the packed earth floor with others who've already gathered. The porridge is coarse and chewy with tiny husks clinging to each bite. A dollop of honey makes it sweet, and the occasional nut or dried fruit is a rare treat. There is no coffee, no buttered toast, and certainly no chocolate croissants. You tell yourself you're grateful for the honey. A boy next to you grins, his face smeared with porridge, and asks if you're planning to help in the fields or with the animals today. Before you can answer, a man with arms like tree trunks laughs and says, "Both." He tears off a chunk of flatbread baked the night before and dips it into his porridge, a makeshift spoon. You follow suit, chewing slowly as the chatter around you builds. The morning meal isn't just about filling stomachs, it's about planning the day. One elder talks about which animals need to be moved to new grazing ground. Another worries aloud about the weather turning and whether the harvest will be enough to see them through winter. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age communities stored large reserves of food or relied on constant small harvests, but the tension in the room tells you food security is always on their minds. As you finish the last bite of your porridge, you notice a woman carefully portioning out herbs into small pouches. She explains they're for the livestock, mixed into feed to keep parasites at bay. It's a reminder that nothing here is accidental. Every decision, from how food is eaten to how animals are cared for, ties back to survival. A group of younger villagers rises to stoke the fire outside where a large pot hangs from a sturdy tripod. They're heating water to wash hands and faces, splashing the cold liquid onto their skin with a mix of resignation and groggy amusement. One of them jokes that the water will wake them up faster than any drink could, and you can't help but agree as you feel the chill against your own fingers. Someone hands you a cup of thin ale, barely alcoholic, more like fermented grain water, and you sip it slowly. The flavor is earthy and sour, but it's safer than drinking straight from the stream, and you can almost convince yourself it's refreshing. The villagers drink this with nearly every meal, even the children, because it's often the cleanest liquid they can get. Outside, the sun is climbing higher, burning off the last threads of mist. The fort is fully awake now. Chickens peck at stray grains, goats bleat impatiently, and the lowing of cattle carries through the air. The clatter of tools rings out from a nearby workshop, where someone is already hammering away at a glowing piece of metal. You stand and stretch the stiffness in your back, reminding you that straw mats aren't exactly ergonomic. A man waves you over and points toward the livestock pens, grinning as though he knows you're about to learn something important and probably unpleasant. You follow him down the path, wondering just how hands-on this morning is going to get. As you walk, you glance back at the fire where the bowls of porridge were stacked neatly to dry. The smell of honey and smoke lingers, but the moment of comfort is quickly replaced by the realization that now the real work begins. Ahead, you can hear the restless sounds of animals waiting to be fed, herded, and managed. This Bronze Age breakfast has barely taken the edge off your hunger, and you're already burning through the energy it gave you. You follow the man toward the livestock pens, the packed earth beneath your feet, growing softer and muddier with every step. The morning sun is climbing now, warm enough to draw out the sharper smells of animal life. The musky scent of goats, the pungent tang of sheep manure, and the heavier aroma of cattle packed into close quarters. You wrinkle your nose, but the man beside you only grins. You get used to it, he says with a shrug, though you have your doubts. The pens are busy, almost chaotic. Goats bleat impatiently, sheep press close together in tight clusters, and a pair of massive cattle snort clouds of steam into the air. Children scurry between the animals, tossing handfuls of grain and hay into troughs, while older villagers check for injuries and signs of illness. A woman with a long braid is carefully trimming a sheep's overgrown hooves, her hands steady and practiced. She waves you over and gestures for you to hold the animal still. Its wool is coarse against your palms, and you try to ignore the rank smell as it squirms. You're led next to the goat pen where the animals are already jostling for attention. The man hands you a wooden bucket and shows you how to milk one of the does. It's harder than it looks. The goat kicks at your arm, and you narrowly avoid spilling the meager stream of milk you manage to coax out. He chuckles softly, assuring you that it took him years to master the technique. You wonder how much of your own breakfast depended on the patience of people like him. As the goats settle, the group turns its attention to the cattle. These massive animals are more than just a food source, they're living engines of labor. Some will be yoked to plows in the fields, others used to haul goods along rough, rutted tracks. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age Hillfort communities specialized in cattle breeding or simply kept enough to meet their own needs, but you can see how important they are here. You help drive a small herd through a wooden gate and into the outer grazing area. It's slow work, punctuated by the occasional stubborn animal refusing to budge. One child waves a stick and whistles sharply, and somehow the herd obeys, moving as a single mass toward the open pasture. You make a mental note never to underestimate 8-year-olds with sticks again. Back near the pens, someone is gathering eggs from a cluster of hens. The birds flap and squawk indignantly, but the villager moves with practiced efficiency, dropping each egg carefully into a basket padded with straw. These eggs will likely end up in tonight's stew, though a few may be set aside for trade. You notice that nothing here goes to waste. Even the manure piling up in the pens will be carried to the fields to fertilize crops. A pair of dogs circle the edges of the pens, watchful and alert. One of them trots up to you, tail wagging, and nudges your hand for a scratch. The villager beside you explains that the dogs aren't just companions, they're essential for herding and guarding the livestock. Without them, predators and thieves would have a much easier time. Once the animals are fed, milked, and moved to their grazing areas, the pace slows slightly. Villagers gather near a water trough to rinse their hands and faces, splashing the cool water over their tired skin. A few joke about the stubborn cow that broke a fence last week, though they're clearly keeping an eye on the horizon for signs of more trouble. The man who brought you here pats your shoulder. Animals first always, he says simply. And it makes sense. These creatures provide meat, milk, wool hides, and labor. They are wealth on 4 legs as vital as the crops planted in the fields. You take one last look at the pens before heading down a narrow path lined with sheds and small workshops. The steady rhythm of hammering and scraping drifts through the air, drawing you toward the sounds of industry. Bronze Age life, you're realizing, isn't just about farming and herding. It's about crafting the tools, weapons, and ornaments that make this community strong and connected. As you approach the largest shed, the air grows warmer, thick with the metallic scent of molten bronze and the acrid smoke of charcoal fires. The low hum of voices and the hiss of water on hot metal greet you as you step inside, ready to witness the skill that gives the Bronze Age its name. You step into the large, smoky workshop and are immediately enveloped by the warmth radiating from the charcoal fires. The air is thick with the scent of molten metal and scorched wood, a combination that makes your eyes water and your nose twitch. Sparks fly as a blacksmith hammers rhythmically at a glowing ingot, each strike ringing through the dimly lit space like the beat of a drum. This is the lifeblood of the hill fort, the crafting of tools, weapons, and ornaments from bronze, the alloy that gives this entire age its name. The blacksmith, his arms corded with muscle from years of work, pauses to plunge the glowing metal into a trough of water. A hiss of steam erupts, briefly obscuring his face. He looks up at you with a faint smile, clearly used to wide-eyed newcomers watching his craft. He gestures for you to step closer. On a stone table nearby, you see the raw materials laid out, small ingots of copper and tin carefully measured to ensure the right proportions. He explains in a low voice that getting the ratio wrong could make the metal too soft or too brittle. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age smiths fully understood the chemistry behind the process, or simply relied on experience and tradition. But here it's clear that skill is everything. A younger apprentice is working on smaller projects, carefully casting bronze into clay molds shaped like spearheads. You watch as he pours the molten metal with steady hands, the liquid glowing like captured sunlight as it fills the narrow channels. Once the molds are cooled and broken open, the rough shapes will be polished and sharpened. You pick one up, surprised by its weight, and imagine how formidable it would be in battle. Not all the work here is martial. On another bench, a woman is crafting intricate jewelry bracelets, twisted from thin bronze rods, pendants shaped like spirals and suns, and delicate pins meant to fasten cloaks. She uses simple tools, but her precision is remarkable. You can see how these ornaments serve not just as decoration, but as symbols of status and identity within the community. The blacksmith beckons you to try your hand at hammering a piece of bronze. You grip the hammer awkwardly, and your first strike glances off the metal with an embarrassing clang. He chuckles and corrects your grip, guiding your arm through a proper swing. This time, the hammer lands squarely, flattening the glowing metal just enough to satisfy him. It's hard work. Your arm aches after only a few strikes, but you feel a small surge of pride. You move next to the woodworkers area where carpenters are shaping hafts for axes and handles for knives. The smell of freshly cut wood is a welcome contrast to the metallic tang of the forge. One carpenter shows you how they fit the bronze heads onto the wooden shafts, securing them tightly with leather bindings. He tells you these tools aren't just for war, they're essential for cutting timber, building houses, and shaping the very landscape around the hill fort. Across the workshop, potters are busy at their wheels, spinning rough clay into sturdy vessels. One woman dips her hands into a bucket of water, smoothing the surface of a large jar meant for grain storage. She explains that some pots will be fired in open pits outside the fort, while others will be hardened in the communal kiln. You run your fingers along the rim of a finished pot and admire how even and strong it feels. There's a sense of collaboration here that's hard to miss. Each craft feeds into another: bronze tools for carpenters, wooden molds for the smiths, clay vessels to hold food and drink for everyone. The hum of work is steady and purposeful, broken only by the occasional burst of laughter or shouted instruction. You notice a pile of discarded items in the corner: broken spearheads, cracked pottery, and bent pins. One of the apprentices tells you they often recycle what they can. Bronze, after all, is too precious to waste. He picks up a damaged axe head and tosses it back into the smelting pot, where it will be melted down and reborn as something new. The work continues without pause, each task a reminder that the hill fort's survival depends not just on strong walls or fertile fields, but on the tools and skills of its people. You leave the workshop with the rhythmic clang of hammers still echoing in your ears and the faint smell of bronze clinging to your clothes. The sun is high now, and you can hear voices calling from the center of the fort. The morning's work is winding down, and it's time to gather for a midday meal. You follow the sound of laughter and chatter, wondering what simple fare will be shared this time, and what news from beyond the hill fort's walls you might overhear. The center of the hill fort is alive with sound as you approach. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread drifts through the air, mixing with the tang of wood smoke. Villagers are gathering in a wide open space near the central hearth, laying out food on rough wooden tables and woven mats. You can feel your stomach growl in anticipation. A woman with wind-flushed cheeks hands you a hunk of dark bread still warm from the clay oven. Its crust is crisp, the inside dense but pleasantly soft. Next comes a ladle of thick stew served in a simple clay bowl. It's made with lentils, turnips, and small chunks of mutton, seasoned with wild herbs gathered from the surrounding hills. The flavors are earthy and comforting, though the stew is a little gritty from bits of ash clinging to the pot. You sit cross-legged beside others who are already eating, the chatter around you a steady hum. People share news as readily as they share food. One man describes the progress of the barley crop in the fields beyond the walls, while another jokes about a goat that escaped into the forest the previous night. Someone mentions spotting smoke from another settlement downriver, sparking speculation about whether it was a feast, a funeral, or less optimistically, a raid. Historians still argue whether hill fort communities lived in constant fear of attack, or only prepared for rare conflicts, but you can sense a quiet wariness beneath the villagers' laughter. Children dart between the adults, snatching bits of bread and fruit before running off again. One small girl proudly shows you a piece of amber strung on a leather cord, explaining that her father traded for it with merchants who came through the gate a week ago. You admire the warm glow of the translucent stone, imagining how far it must have traveled to end up here. A young man plops down next to you and offers a sip from his cup. The drink is a thin, slightly sour ale brewed in large wooden vats and consumed daily by everyone, even the children. It's safer than water and just strong enough to loosen the edges of the morning's fatigue. You thank him and take a careful sip, hoping it doesn't make you drowsy before the afternoon's work. As you finish your meal, a group of elders gathers near the central fire to discuss the day's priorities. One of them, a tall woman with hair streaked silver, stands to address the crowd. She speaks of the need to repair a damaged section of the outer rampart and keep a closer watch on the livestock. She also mentions that traders from a coastal settlement may arrive soon bringing salt and fish to exchange for grain and bronze goods. The villagers nod solemnly. Trade is the lifeblood of this community, as vital as the crops and herds that sustain them. Nearby, a boy strums a lyre made from animal sinew and polished wood. Its gentle notes weave through the conversation, a reminder that even in the Bronze Age, people sought beauty amid the hard work of survival. A few villagers hum along quietly, while others simply close their eyes and listen. When the meal is done, bowls and cups are rinsed in a communal basin and set aside to dry. The crowd begins to disperse, some heading toward the gates and others toward the workshops. You rise to your feet, brushing crumbs from your cloak, and notice a group preparing to head out into the fields. One of them waves you over, grinning. "Time to see how we feed ourselves," he says. As you follow him down a narrow path that leads toward the fort's outer gates, you glance back at the central fire. The smell of stew still lingers, and you're grateful for the warmth in your belly. But beyond the safety of the walls lies another rhythm of hillfort life. The fields, the foraging, and the watchful work that ensures the community has enough to survive another year. The sound of creaking wooden gates reaches your ears, and you step into the bright sunlight beyond the walls, ready to learn how these villagers cultivate the land that sustains them. You step through the wooden gates and onto the path that leads to the fields beyond. The air feels different outside the fort, lighter, more open but also less secure. A pair of guards stands just inside the gate, spears in hand, watching the horizon with practiced vigilance. One nods as you pass, his eyes scanning the distant tree line. It's a subtle reminder that while the fields are vital to the community, they also leave it exposed. The path winds down the hillside, opening up into a patchwork of cultivated plots, bordered by low earthen banks and simple wooden fences. Here the soil is dark and rich, churned recently by the hooves of oxen pulling wooden plows. You watch as a man guides a plow behind one of the massive animals, his voice low and steady as he coaxes it forward. The tool bites into the soil with surprising efficiency, turning neat furrows that will soon be planted with barley and wheat. You're handed a small sack of seeds and shown how to scatter them evenly along the freshly turned rows. The rhythm is simple but satisfying stepcast. Stepcast. The seeds bounce against the soil and disappear beneath the thin layer of earth tucked away like tiny promises. You notice a few children doing the same work nearby, their movements less precise but no less earnest. A woman with a bundle of tools approaches and hands you a simple hoe. Together you move to a nearby plot where young plants have already sprouted. She shows you how to break up the weeds that threaten to crowd out the crops, the metal tip of the tool clinking softly against stones buried in the soil. It's tedious work, and you're soon sweating beneath the afternoon sun, but there's a quiet rhythm to it that feels grounding. Beyond the fields, you see other villagers gathering berries and nuts from the forest's edge. Foraging supplements the community's diet and provides valuable ingredients for medicines and dyes. One forager returns with a basket full of hazelnuts, proudly showing you the haul before disappearing back into the trees. Guards patrol the area, their spears and round shields glinting in the sunlight. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age communities faced constant threats from raiders or if these precautions were more symbolic than necessary. But standing here surrounded by open land and dense forests, you understand the caution. A single surprise attack could devastate the community's food supply. You pause for a moment to drink from a leather water flask, the liquid warm but refreshing. Nearby, an elderly man tends a small garden filled with medicinal herbs, yarrow for wounds, mint for stomach ailments, and something he calls sleepwort, which he claims can calm restless minds. He chuckles as he explains that some villagers swear by it while others insist it's useless. You make a mental note to remember the name just in case your straw mat feels too lumpy tonight. A sudden commotion draws your attention. One of the oxen has slipped its yoke and is lumbering toward the edge of the field. Two boys sprint after it, waving their arms and shouting. The animal pauses, then reluctantly allows itself to be guided back. Everyone laughs once the crisis is over, the tension melting away as quickly as it appeared. As the afternoon wears on, the work continues in cycles of planting, weeding, and tending. You notice how every member of the community has a role to play, from the youngest children scattering seeds to the oldest elders offering advice on when to harvest. It's a finely tuned system honed by generations who understood that survival depended on cooperation. When the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, the group gathers their tools and starts back toward the gates. You carry your empty seed sack, feeling the pleasant ache of muscles that aren't used to this kind of labor. Ahead, the hillfort's wooden walls rise against the sky, their ramparts lined with sharp stakes. You can see figures moving along the top, warriors keeping watch as the fields empty and the gates close for the night. As you step back inside the fort, the change in atmosphere is immediate. The air feels warmer, the sounds of work replaced by the steady murmur of voices and the distant clang of hammers. You glance up at the ramparts and feel a flicker of curiosity. What would it be like to stand guard there, scanning the horizon for danger as the stars rise overhead? But for now, your path leads deeper into the fort toward the towering earthen banks and timber walls. You're about to see how this community defends itself, not just with weapons, but with the very architecture of the hill fort itself. You approach the towering ramparts of the hill fort, their sheer size more impressive up close than they appeared from the fields. The walls are not simple fences. They're an engineering feat of timber, earth, and stone. Tall wooden posts form the skeleton, packed with layers of earth and rubble to create a solid barrier several meters thick. The outer face is studded with sharpened stakes, each one a grim deterrent to would-be attackers. A warrior on the walkway above calls down a greeting, his voice carrying on the wind. You're waved toward a ladder leading up the side, and you climb carefully, gripping the rough wooden rungs. At the top, the view opens up in every direction. The fort's entire layout is visible, the roundhouses clustered in the center. The livestock pens to one side, the workshops scattered nearby. Beyond the walls, the hills roll away into a patchwork of forest and field, dotted with distant streams that glint like silver threads in the sunlight. A guard leans casually against the timber rail, spear in hand, and gestures for you to stand beside him. He explains that life on the ramparts is equal parts vigilance and boredom. Most days, the biggest threat is a stray animal wandering too close to the gates. But every now and then, there are signs of raiders' footprints in the forest, a column of smoke where it shouldn't be, or even a sudden arrow loosed from the shadows. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age hillforts were primarily defensive structures or symbols of power, but standing here you can see how they serve both purposes. The walls keep the community safe, but they also announce strength to anyone who might be watching from afar. The guard points out various features the gate reinforced with iron fittings. The ditches dug deep around the outer perimeter, the smaller platforms where archers could station themselves during an attack. He taps his spear against a wooden parapet, explaining that any enemy who made it past the ditch would still face a near-vertical wall of timber and sharpened stakes. Few would try, he says with a grim smile. You notice that some sections of the ramparts are freshly repaired, the wood lighter in color than the older planks. A group of villagers is at work below, replacing damaged stakes and packing fresh earth into the embankment. One man calls up that they're also digging new pits along the fort's approach, designed to trip or slow attackers. You can tell the defenses are constantly maintained a living barrier rather than a static one. Another guard offers you a chance to handle his spear. The shaft is smooth and solid, tipped with a gleaming bronze head, sharpened to a deadly point. You imagine wielding it in a real fight, and realize just how unprepared you'd be if anything actually attacked the fort. He chuckles when he sees your hesitant grip, showing you how to balance the weapon properly before taking it back with practiced ease. From your vantage point, you spot a group of traders approaching along the distant track. The guards notice them too, and the air grows tense for a moment until someone recognizes the figures. One guard signals to those at the gate, and the heavy doors creak open just wide enough to admit the travelers. You descend the ladder and follow the path toward the entrance. The traders are already unloading their good sacks of salt, bundles of dried fish, carved amber beads, and even a few items that seem almost exotic. A piece of fine cloth dyed a vibrant blue, a set of polished shells from the distant coast. The villagers gather to inspect the wares, voices rising with curiosity and excitement. Trade isn't just about goods, it's about news. One of the traders mentions trouble in a settlement upriver where rival groups are vying for control of valuable farmland. Another speaks of a festival held at a sacred site farther west, drawing clans from all directions. The villagers listen closely, filing away every piece of information. In a world without written records, these exchanges are as valuable as the salt and amber changing hands. As the trading continues, you're drawn closer to the bustle at the gate, eager to see how the negotiations unfold. Barter is an art here, a dance of offers and counteroffers, and you're about to witness it in full swing. The gate is alive with activity. As the traders spread their goods on woven mats, each item carefully arranged to catch the eye. Villagers cluster around, pointing, whispering, and reaching out to touch what they cannot easily afford. You stand at the edge of the crowd, taking in the vibrant mix of sights, sounds, and smells. One trader, a wiry man with sunburned cheeks, holds up a small bag of salt and explains its value. Salt is precious here, used to preserve meat and flavor food in a diet that can sometimes feel monotonous. A woman steps forward with a basket of barley, offering it in exchange, but the trader shakes his head, demanding more. Negotiations like this, or common barter, is the only system they have. No coins, no standard currency, just the delicate balance of need and surplus. Another trader unfurls a bolt of deep blue cloth dyed with woad, the color so striking it draws gasps from the crowd. A young woman fingers the fabric wistfully before stepping back, clearly knowing it's out of her reach. Beside the cloth are strings of amber beads, their warm glow catching the light. You learn they likely came from far to the north, traded from community to community until they reach this hill fort. A man with arms like tree trunks examines a set of bronze axe heads, turning them over carefully in his calloused hands. He barters with a trader carrying bundles of dried fish from the coast, and after a few minutes of spirited discussion, the deal is struck. They clasp wrists to seal the bargain, each satisfied with the trade. One of the traders offers you a taste of honeycomb, sticky and sweet, unlike anything you've eaten since arriving. You close your eyes for a moment as the flavor melts across your tongue, and the trader laughs at your obvious delight. He tells you that such luxuries are rare in the hill fort, more likely to be saved for feasts or offered to the gods. The crowd parts slightly as an elder steps forward. Her presence quiets the negotiations for a moment, as she examines a collection of carved bone figurines brought by a younger trader. She selects one shaped like a deer, its antlers elegantly etched, and offers a mixture of grain and wool in exchange. The young trader nods respectfully, clearly honored by her interest. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age hill forts were central hubs for regional trade or simply convenient stops along well-worn routes. Standing here, you can see how the walls offer both safety and opportunity. Traders know they can find eager buyers behind the gates, and the villagers rely on the goods and information they bring from beyond the horizon. As you drift closer to the mats, a boy tugs your sleeve and points out a handful of shiny shells. He whispers that they come from the far coast, a place he's never seen, but dreams about constantly. He fingers the shells as if they were treasure, and you can see how something as simple as an object from a distant land can spark wonder. The bargaining grows louder again, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional good-natured grumble. One woman manages to secure a small block of salt in exchange for a length of fine wool yarn, and she tucks it into her cloak like a prize. Another villager leaves with a new spearhead, the gleaming bronze catching the last rays of the afternoon sun. As the traders pack up the goods that remain, you notice one man walking toward the fort's sacred grove at the edge of the settlement. He carries a basket filled with offerings, honey grain, and a handful of beads. Curious, you follow the path as it narrows, the voices of the crowd fading behind you. The grove is quiet, the air cooler beneath the canopy of ancient trees. You can smell the faint sweetness of flowers and the sharp tang of freshly burned wood. A small group of villagers has gathered here, and you realize you're about to witness another important part of Hillfort life. The rituals and offerings meant to honor the forces they believe keep their world in balance. You step softly into the grove, careful not to disturb the hush that seems to settle over the place. The trees here are older than any in the surrounding forest, their thick trunks twisting upward as though holding up the sky itself. Dappled light filters through the leaves, casting shifting patterns across the mossy ground. The air is cooler, heavier, as if you've crossed an invisible threshold. A small clearing opens ahead where a circle of stones surrounds a low, earthen mound. Villagers stand in a loose ring, their heads bowed as a woman in a cloak of animal skins begins to speak. Her voice is low and steady, carrying a cadence that makes the words feel older than the trees around you. This is no casual gathering. You can sense the gravity of the moment in the way everyone listens, unmoving. The trader you followed steps forward and kneels at the stone circle. He sets down his basket, carefully removing its contents, a wedge of honeycomb, a small bag of barley, and a string of amber beads. One by one, he lays them at the base of the mound. The cloaked woman raises her hands and murmurs a prayer calling on deities tied to the sun, earth, and water. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age rituals honored specific gods or simply the forces of nature, but here the line feels irrelevant. These offerings are acts of gratitude and insurance. A girl no older than 8 approaches next, clutching a tiny clay figurine shaped like a bird. She hesitates, glancing at the elder for reassurance, then places it gently on the mound. The figurine is simple, almost crude, but the care in her movements suggests it's precious to her. You wonder what it meant for her to part with it, and whether she believes the gesture will bring good fortune. The woman in the cloak begins to chant softly the words, blending with the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of insects. A young man steps forward with a small vessel of clear water, and pours it slowly over the offerings, letting it seep into the earth. The scent of damp soil and crushed herbs rises into the air. You notice other small tokens already placed around the stones. Polished shells, bits of carved bone, fragments of pottery. Some are weathered by rain and sun, reminders that this ritual has been carried out many times before. The elder moves slowly around the circle, sprinkling ashes from a smoldering pot. She stops before each villager, touching a charred twig to their foreheads. One man presses his eyes shut as though the blessing might carry him into the next harvest. Nearby, a pair of men tend a fire, tossing dried herbs into the flames. The smoke curls upward in thin, fragrant wisps, drifting lazily toward the treetops. One of the men explains that the smoke carries the prayers to the unseen forces watching over them. You think about how fragile life in the hill fort must feel at times, how a single bad harvest or illness could unravel everything. And you understand why rituals like this matter. The chant fades into silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The villagers begin to leave offerings of their own, a sprig of flowers, a sliver of meat, even a woven bracelet. When it's your turn, you kneel and place a small pebble at the mound, unsure what else to offer. The cloaked woman meets your eyes and nods slightly as if to say the gesture is enough. As the ritual draws to a close, the group disperses quietly, each person carrying a new weight of reflection. Some linger at the edge of the grove, whispering to one another, or touching the trunks of the ancient trees. You step back onto the main path, the fort, now visible in the distance. The sun is sinking lower, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. You can hear the rhythmic clack of looms and the tap of hammers from the workshops as the community shifts into its evening rhythm. There are still tools to repair, textiles to weave, and houses to maintain before the day ends. You follow the path toward the sound of activity, ready to see how this industrious community makes use of the final hours of daylight. The sounds of activity grow louder as you approach the heart of the hill fort once more. The glow of late afternoon light spills over the timber ramparts, casting long shadows on the ground. You pass through the bustling workshops where villagers are working with renewed focus, making the most of the dwindling daylight. At one end of the compound, a woman sits at a wooden loom, her fingers flying as she weaves a long strip of fabric. The warp threads are taut and evenly spaced, and she deftly passes the shuttle through, beating it down with a rhythmic tap. You notice how she alternates colors, creating a simple striped pattern in muted reds and browns. She glances up briefly to smile at you before returning to her work. Each strip of cloth can take days to finish, and she's clearly determined to add a few more inches before the sun sets. Nearby, a man is repairing a large clay storage jar that cracked during the morning's chores. He applies a sticky resin made from tree sap to the break, then wraps it tightly with twine. The resin smells faintly of pine as it heats near a small fire. He explains that if the jar can't be salvaged, the pieces will be crushed and reused to temper new pottery. Nothing goes to waste here. Across the way, a group of young men is rethatching the roof of a roundhouse. They work in pairs, layering bundles of reed and straw to form a thick, weatherproof covering. One man climbs up a ladder with an armful of straw, while another secures the layers with rope made from twisted fibers. The rhythm of their voices and the scrape of straw against wood blend into a steady, almost musical backdrop. Children scamper in and out of the workshops, carrying water or gathering scraps of wood for the hearths. One girl pauses to show you a small wooden toy. She's carved a rough but charming figure of a deer. She giggles and runs off again, clutching the toy tightly. You move toward the carpenter's shed, where two men are shaping wooden planks for a new gate repair. The smell of fresh-cut wood fills the air as their axes bite into the timber with precise practice swings. One man explains that the gate must be strong enough to withstand not just time, but any potential attack. He taps the plank to emphasize his point, and you feel the solid weight beneath your hand. In another corner, you spot the familiar glow of the blacksmith's forge. Sparks fly as a hammer rings out against a glowing piece of bronze, the sound steady and sure. An apprentice quenches a finished spearhead in water, the hiss rising like a whisper into the dusk. He glances up at you and grins, clearly proud of his work. The air grows cooler as the sun dips lower, casting a warm, amber glow across the fort. Villagers begin tidying their workspaces, stacking tools and materials neatly for the next day. One woman carefully rolls up a half-finished length of woven cloth and tucks it into a storage bin. Another sweeps wood shavings from the carpentry floor into a pile later to be used as kindling. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age Hillforts were primarily centers of trade defense or craftsmanship. Watching the community at work, you suspect the answer is all three. These evening hours aren't idle. They're essential for maintaining the structure's tools and goods that keep the settlement thriving. As the activity slows, villagers begin making their way toward the council hut at the center of the fort. You're told that an important matter needs settling tonight, and the elders will hear both sides of the dispute. Curious, you follow the flow of people into the wide circular structure lit by flickering torches. Inside, the air is thick with anticipation. Wooden benches line the walls, already filled with villagers whispering quietly to one another. At the center sits a group of elders, their faces solemn as they prepare to mediate. You can feel the weight of tradition in this place, where decisions are made not just for individuals, but for the survival of the entire community. The murmur of voices hushes as the first disputing party steps forward, ready to present their case. The council hut grows quiet as two men step forward, each holding themselves stiffly as though the weight of their grievance has shaped their posture. The torchlight flickers across their faces, highlighting their furrowed brows and clenched jaws. One of them, a younger man with calloused hands and a determined expression, speaks first. He explains that a stretch of grazing land near the river belongs to his family and has for as long as anyone can remember. But the older man beside him, weathered and wiry, insists the land has always been his, claiming his family's cattle have grazed there for generations. The elders listen patiently, nodding and occasionally asking clarifying questions. This isn't a trivial matter. Land and livestock are the lifeblood of the hill fort, and disputes like this can ripple through the entire community, if not resolved fairly. You notice a few villagers whispering softly among themselves, each clearly aware that the council's decision could set an important precedent. One elder, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice as steady as a drumbeat, asks each man to bring forward witnesses. A shepherd steps up first, nervously twisting his cloak in his hands, as he says he's seen both families use the land at different times. Another witness, an elderly woman leaning on a carved walking stick, recalls helping to mark the boundary stones many years ago, though she admits she can't remember the exact spot. Historians still argue whether Hillfort communities followed strict laws or relied on tradition and consensus. Watching the elders work, you can see it's a careful balance of both. They weigh not just the evidence, but also the potential impact on harmony within the community. The younger man gestures toward the older one's cattle, claiming they trampled his newly planted barley. The older man retorts that the crops were planted too close to the traditional grazing area. Voices rise for a moment until an elder raises her hand and the room falls silent. She speaks calmly, reminding everyone present that the community's survival depends on cooperation, not conflict. The elders confer quietly, their heads bent together in the center of the hut. After several tense minutes, the woman with the sharp eyes delivers the verdict. The disputed land will be shared with clear boundaries marked by new stones. Both families will work together to maintain the area, and if either violates the agreement, the council will revisit the issue. There's a ripple of relief through the room. The solution isn't perfect. Neither man looks entirely satisfied, but it prevents further division. The younger man nods stiffly while the older one mutters something under his breath before extending a hand. They clasp wrists in a gesture of agreement, and the tension begins to dissipate. As the council moves on to hear other minor disputes, a missing basket of fish accusations of borrowing tools without permission, you notice how the entire community participates in these proceedings. Children sit quietly at the edges, learning by watching, while adults weigh in respectfully when called upon. Decisions here aren't handed down from a single ruler. They're shaped by the collective wisdom of those who've lived through enough lean years to know that unity is survival. The final matter of the evening involves a planned repair to the outer ditch. Volunteers are needed and hands go up readily. You realize how much of this community's strength comes from the willingness of its members to contribute even when the work is difficult. When the council meeting concludes, villagers file out of the hut into the cool night air. Torches flicker in the wind, casting long shadows across the packed earth. Conversations pick up again lighter now that the disputes have been settled. Someone jokes about the stubbornness of cattle, drawing a round of laughter that seems to release the last of the tension. You follow the crowd toward the central fire, where preparations are already underway for the evening meal. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the sweet aroma of baking bread, making your stomach rumble. A group of musicians is tuning their lyres and drums, and you can tell the feast will be more than just food. It'll be a celebration of making it through another day. As the first notes of music drift through the air, you find a place near the fire, ready to see how the Hillfort comes alive, with food, drink, and laughter when the work is done. The central hearth is already roaring when you arrive, casting a warm glow that lights up the expectant faces of the gathered villagers. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, spiced with herbs collected from the hills earlier in the day. A large clay pot simmers nearby steam, curling lazily upward, and you catch the earthy scent of root vegetables and lentils wafting from within. A woman ladles stew into simple clay bowls as children dart around her, eager for their share. You're handed one and feel its welcome warmth seep into your palms. The broth is thick, hearty, and flecked with tender pieces of venison. A young boy with a mouthful of bread proudly tells you the deer was hunted just yesterday by his uncle. He gestures to the man who's now cutting slices from a haunch of roasted meat and distributing them to the crowd. The villagers gather close around the fire, sitting cross-legged on straw mats or low wooden stools. The first bites are eaten quickly, hunger, overcoming any thought of savoring. Then, as bowls are emptied and bellies filled, the pace slows and the conversations begin to flow. You listen as two women discuss the coming winter, wondering aloud whether the grain stores will hold. A man with a booming laugh recounts a misadventure from a past hunt, miming the way he once tumbled headfirst into a river while chasing a boar. Laughter erupts around you, echoing off the Hillfort walls. The music begins softly at first. A man plucks the strings of a lyre, coaxing out a melody that weaves through the chatter like a thread. A drum joins in its steady rhythm, mimicking the heartbeat of the community. Someone begins to hum, and soon voices rise together in a song you don't recognize, but feel as though you've known forever. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age music served a ritual purpose or was simply for entertainment. Watching the villagers sway and clap along, you realize it's both. The songs celebrate the land, the harvest, and the bonds between the people gathered here. A woman with nimble fingers passes you a cup of ale, the brew stronger than the thin drink from earlier in the day. You sip cautiously, its warmth spreading quickly through your chest. The flavor is yeasty and slightly bitter, but it pairs perfectly with the savory stew still lingering on your tongue. Children laugh and chase one another in the firelight, while the elders share quieter conversations on the edges of the gathering. You notice one man carefully portioning out scraps of bread and meat to be set aside for the sick and the elderly who couldn't join the meal. Nothing is wasted and no one is forgotten. As the evening deepens, the musicians shift to livelier tunes. Villagers form a circle and begin a simple dance, stepping and clapping in time with the drum. You're pulled into the rhythm before you can protest, laughing as you stumble through the unfamiliar steps. The woman next to you steadies your arm and reassures you that everyone missteps the first time. When the dance ends, the crowd settles back around the fire, flushed and smiling. Someone begins to tell a story, an epic tale about a hero who ventured beyond the mountains to bring back a precious treasure. The narrator's voice rises and falls dramatically, drawing gasps and laughter at just the right moments. Even the children sit, wrap their eyes wide in the flickering light. The smell of roasted meat still lingers, but it's joined now by the sweet aroma of honeyed cakes baking on flat stones near the fire. You're handed one, its sticky surface hot enough to burn your fingers. You take a tentative bite and nearly melt at the burst of sweetness. The music, the laughter, and the flickering firelight begin to blur together, creating a warmth that sinks deeper than the stew or ale ever could. This isn't just a meal, it's a reminder of why the villagers endure the day's endless labor. As the stories wind down and the fire crackles softly, someone motions toward the largest roundhouse at the edge of the fort. It's time for more stories, the kind told in the glow of a hearth as the community prepares to drift into sleep. You follow the crowd toward the largest roundhouse, its wide doorway spilling warm firelight onto the packed earth outside. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke beeswax, and the faint sweetness of the honeyed cake still clutched in a few hands. The hearth in the center burns steadily, its flames painting the walls in shifting shadows that make the carved wooden posts seem almost alive. People settle into a rough circle around the fire. Some sit cross-legged on woven mats. Others lean back against the curved walls wrapped in cloaks. The chatter fades into expectant quiet as an elder steps forward, his lined face glowing in the firelight. He carries a long staff topped with a carved animal head and taps it against the floor 3 times before beginning. His voice is low and rhythmic, weaving a story older than anyone present. It's a tale of a hunter who braved the northern mountains in search of a mythical stag, a creature said to possess the power to heal any wound. You find yourself drawn in despite the soothing cadence of his voice. Each detail is vivid, the crunch of snow underfoot, the glittering ice that hung like teeth from the cave's mouth, the hunter's lonely song as he pressed deeper into the wilderness. Children huddle closer together, wide-eyed. One gasps audibly when the hunter finally finds the stag, only to discover it can speak. "Will you harm me, or will you learn from me?" the creature asks. The elder's voice drops to a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in, hanging on every word. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age storytelling served mainly as entertainment or as a way to preserve knowledge. Hearing this story, you realize it's both. Lessons about bravery, humility, and respect for the natural world are woven into the narrative as seamlessly as the strands of a finely woven cloak. When the elder finishes, the hut is silent for a moment before a ripple of applause and laughter breaks the spell. Another villager steps forward to tell a story of his own, a humorous tale about a clever fox who outwits a greedy badger. The room erupts with chuckles as he pantomimes the badger's bumbling attempts to trick the fox, his expressions so exaggerated that even the most serious elders can't help but smile. The stories continue one after another, tales of heroes and ancestors of gods who walk among mortals and of ancient battles fought far beyond the hillfort's walls. You notice how each storyteller uses gestures, changes in tone, and even small props to bring the characters to life. It's a tradition that binds the community together as surely as the walls that protect them. A young woman with a soft voice is the last to speak. She tells a quiet story about the stars, how each one represents a soul watching over the living. She points to a hole in the thatched roof where a single star is visible, and the group gazes upward in reflective silence. The fire has burned low by now, the embers glowing softly. Children are beginning to doze against their parents' shoulders, their eyelids heavy after the long day. You feel a similar weariness settling in, but there's still one more stop before sleep, the night watch. A guard steps into the roundhouse and speaks softly to the elders. Several men and women rise, adjusting their cloaks and belts as they prepare to take their places on the ramparts. You're invited to join them to see firsthand what it's like to guard the community through the quiet hours of the night. You step out into the chill air with the others, the warmth of the fire quickly replaced by a sharp breeze. The stars overhead are brilliant, scattered like shards of bronze across the dark sky. Ahead, the wooden ladder leading up to the walls waits, and you can already see sentries pacing slowly above their silhouettes outlined by torchlight. The ladder creaks softly as you climb, your hands gripping the rough wooden rungs until you reach the top of the ramparts. The air feels colder up here, sharpened by the wind sweeping across the hills. The torches planted along the walkway flicker and gutter, casting pools of light that make the shadows beyond the walls seem even deeper. A guard nods in greeting and hands you a small torch, its flame sputtering slightly in the breeze. "Keep it low," she says in a hushed voice. "We need to see out, not be seen." You tuck the torch carefully into a niche along the walkway and step up to the timber parapet, gazing out into the dark landscape below. The world beyond the walls is silent and vast. The hillfort feels like an island in the night, its walls holding back the wilderness. You hear the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional rustle of leaves, and faintly the steady trickle of the stream that winds at the base of the hill. Every sound is amplified in the stillness, making you realize just how exposed you would feel out there. One of the guards, a man with a quiet voice and a worn spear, explains the watch rotation. 2 people patrol each side of the fort, pausing at intervals to scan the horizon. Another pair remains near the gates, ready to raise the alarm if needed. He admits that most nights are uneventful, but that doesn't lessen their vigilance. It only takes one moment, he says, eyes scanning the forest edge. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age raids were frequent or rare, but watching the guards move silently along the walls, you sense they live with the possibility every night. The ramparts aren't just a physical barrier. They're a symbol of the community's determination to endure. You join a patrol walking slowly along the wooden walkway. The ground drops steeply away on the outer side, and you're careful with your footing as the wind tugs at your cloak. From this vantage point, you can see the distant glow of another settlement's fires, flickering faintly on the horizon. One of the guards notices it too and comments quietly that it could mean a feast, a watchfire, or trouble. At one point, a noise from the forest makes everyone pause. It's faint, like a branch snapping underfoot. The guards freeze spears at the ready as they strain to hear more. Seconds stretch into minutes before the sound repeats, closer this time. Just as the tension peaks, a pair of deer bound into the clearing, their hooves crunching softly against the frosted ground. The guards relax, exchanging quiet chuckles. Not raiders, someone whispers. Just the night's own patrol. As the hours pass, the rhythm of the watch becomes oddly soothing. The slow pacing along the walls, the soft murmur of conversation, and the flicker of torches all blend into a kind of nocturnal lullaby. Occasionally, a guard pauses to adjust a loose board or tamp down a torch, small acts of maintenance that keep the fort secure. Below, the roundhouses are quiet now, their fires banked low. You imagine the villagers asleep on their straw mats, unaware of the silent figures pacing above to keep them safe. One of the guards remarks that the watch is lonely work, but it also fosters a sense of purpose. "Out here, you remember why the walls matter," she says softly. When the next watch arrives to relieve your group, the transition is seamless. The fresh sentries take their places with quiet nods, and you descend the ladder, your legs grateful to be back on solid ground. The fort is hushed save for the faint crackle of the central hearth and the low murmur of a guard at the gate. A woman with a gentle smile gestures toward one of the roundhouses where the other villagers are sleeping. "It's late," she says. "Find a place to rest while you can. Morning comes fast here." You nod and follow her into the roundhouse, ready to experience the final, quietest part of life inside the hill fort. You step quietly into the roundhouse, careful not to trip over the bundles of cloaks and straw mats that line the floor. The air inside is warm and heavy with the mingled scents of wood smoke wool and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. The central hearth glows faintly, embers casting soft orange light that makes the thatched roof above seem impossibly high. Most of the villagers are already asleep, curled beneath woolen blankets with their backs to the walls. You pick your way to an open space on the far side of the room and unroll a thin mat. The ground is firm but not uncomfortable, softened by layers of straw beneath the packed earth. A dog stirs in its sleep nearby, thumping its tail lazily before settling again with a sigh. You lie down and pull a rough woolen blanket over your shoulders. The warmth is immediate, but so is the awareness of how close you are to everyone else. You can hear the soft breathing of children bundled together, the occasional rustle of someone shifting position, and the muted snoring of a man across the hearth. It's a strange sort of intimacy, but it also feels safe. The walls of the roundhouse, thick and curved, cradle the group like a protective shell. One of the elders whispers a few words from the other side of the fire, a quiet goodnight blessing. It's not meant for you specifically, but you feel it settle over the room like a warm cloak. Historians still argue whether such murmured phrases were rooted in religion or simply tradition, but you suspect they served both purposes. You stare up at the rafters, your eyes tracing the outlines of bundles of grain stored safely above the hearth. The flickering embers throw dancing shadows across the wooden beams, making them seem almost alive. Your mind drifts back over the day, the misty dawn over the hill fort, the scent of grain porridge, the steady rhythm of work in the fields and workshops, the music and laughter by the central fire. Each moment weaves together into a tapestry of life that feels both foreign and familiar. A child stirs and mutters softly in their sleep. A woman closest to them gently shushes the child, brushing a hand over their brow. The noise fades, replaced once again by the quiet hum of collective rest. It's a rhythm as steady as the heartbeat of the fort itself. Your thoughts grow hazier, the edges of consciousness softening with each slow breath. You think of the guards still walking the ramparts above, of the distant deer in the forest of the sacred grove where offerings were laid earlier. The world outside may hold uncertainty, but inside these walls, for now, there is peace. The fire gives one last crackle as a log collapses into glowing coals. You shift slightly under the blanket, feeling the weight of the day's work settle deeper into your bones. It's a comforting heaviness, the kind that comes from knowing you've earned your rest. The sounds of the hill fort at night, soft snores, the rustle of blankets. The low sigh of the embers become your lullaby. Your eyelids grow too heavy to fight any longer, and the darkness behind them is warm, quiet, and complete. The embers in the hearth glow like tiny stars, their light softening with each passing moment. The roundhouse is quiet now, the room settling into the deep stillness of night. You can hear the steady breathing of those around you, a sound as soothing as the gentle wind outside the walls. The fire cracks softly one last time, sending a faint shower of sparks upward toward the roof beams. You let your gaze follow them until they disappear, leaving only the glow of the coals. The scent of warm straw and wood smoke fills the air, grounding you in the simple comfort of the space. You pull the blanket a little closer, feeling its rough wool against your skin. Each breath is slower, now deeper, your body finally loosening after the rhythm of the day. There is nothing more to do, nothing to fix or finish. The work will wait for the sun, and for now, rest belongs to you. Outside, the guards keep their quiet vigil on the ramparts, the stars scattered above them like ancient watchfires. Beyond the hill fort, the forest lies silent. The world paused for just a few hours of stillness. Inside, the walls hold the warmth of the hearth and the closeness of the community, the fragile but steadfast security that has carried them through countless nights like this one. Your eyes close not out of effort, but out of ease. You feel the heaviness of the blanket, the firmness of the earth beneath you, the soft hum of life all around. Sleep comes slowly but surely, like a tide rolling into shore. The embers fade, and with them so do your thoughts. All that's left is quiet and the promise of another dawn.